Seats. We're ready to resume. If I can invite council to please return to their seats. Let's get started. I'll only break the cattle prod out if necessity dictates. We're not there yet. Maybe after lunch, we'll see. I know, I should have brought my symphony bells. Dun, dun, dun. Very nice. I think we have a traffic jam. We need an HOV lane at the croissant bar. High density, high traffic density at the pastry table. All right, so our next section that we're getting ready to start is city infrastructure and transportation, also a big topic as I met with many of you in the weeks leading up until today. And our first speaker on this is going to be Ben Gorzel, our CFO, and Mike Frisbee. So, Ben, would you like to take the floor?
So good morning again. What I'm going to be covering in this part of the presentation is really giving you just a very quick overview of our outstanding debt, and then I'll get to our recommendation for the 2017 bond program. So just a quick reminder on the types of debt that the city issues. You have general obligation bonds and certificates of obligation. These are property tax supported debt. The GOs, general obligation bonds, are of course the bond elections that we have every 5 years. It's a property tax supported instrument. It's got the full faith and credit taxing power of the city behind it, and that's where our AAA bond rating is at. It also applies to our certificates of obligation. That is also property tax supported debt. The only difference between those two instruments are the general obligation bonds are voted. The certificates of obligation are non-voted. However, we have statutory notice provisions, so we notice the public on what we're going to be utilizing certificates of obligation projects that we're going to be funding with that. Tax notes are shorter term debt instruments. They are basically paid for in 7 years or less. We use those to kind of fill in on smaller projects. And then revenue debt is the last category, and best example of that is you have a enterprise system where you're only pledging to the bondholder revenues from that system. A great example of that would be the airport. In terms of, oops, what did I do? In terms of our outstanding debt, we have currently $2.7 billion of outstanding debt. The first line, again, is that property tax supported debt at $1.5 billion. We have a great interest rate on that entire portfolio of 3.3%, taking advantage of the great financial market conditions, low cost of borrowing that we've got. That last column is called average life, and this is something the rating agencies look at. It's something we watch. It is a measure of how fast you're paying off your debt. So if you're issuing, for example, 20-year bonds, you would expect to see average life around 10 years, meaning I'm paying just about as much principal in the first 10 years as I am in the last 10 years. And the reason they watch that is they're looking to see, are you deferring principal into the future and not really meeting your obligations. You can see ours is at a great position. We're at 8.8 years, well under the 10-year threshold. The other self-supporting debt is listed there. I won't go through those, everything from airport to convention center. In terms of property tax support legal debt limits, under the charter, our property tax supported debt cannot exceed 10% of our total assessed valuation. That gives us a debt ceiling of $2.5 billion. You just saw on the previous slide that our property tax support is at $1.5 billion. So we are nowhere near the legal limit in terms of how much property tax supported debt we could issue. In addition to that, state law and specifically the Attorney General's office says that we can't levy a tax rate greater than $1.50 per $100 of valuation to support our property tax supported debt. We're currently at 21 cents, so obviously we're nowhere near that limit either. So in terms of the legal limits, we have no issue there at all. We're not even close to the legal limits. Our constraint is really more our financial capacity. What's the amount of debt that we can reasonably carry as an organization? This is just a quick graphic coming from the Comptroller's Tell the Truth Texas website as of August 31st of 2014. It compares property tax supported debt among the top 10 cities in Texas. You can see that on a debt per capita basis, we are 8th out of 10th in terms of the lowest debt per capita at $1,040. Real quick again on the bond ratings, the scale you see to the right, on the right table again, gives you the different categories. The highest rating you can get is the AAA rating. Then you fall into additional investment grade ratings. There are 3 tiers in each of those, everything from AA to single A to triple B. All of these are considered investment grade. Our general obligation debt is again AAA. Our self-supporting debt, because you're pledging different revenue streams from the bondholders, ranges from AA plus all the way down to like a triple B plus, where we're doing a CONRAC financing out at the airport, where the bondholders' only recourse is the CFC rate that supports that project. So you have a different credit analysis that the rating agencies go through. On the GO bond rating, again, we are the only city with a population of more than 1 million to have a AAA GO bond rating at all. We had a little bit of conversation during the last session about what's the impact if that rating were to decrease. We gave you just some examples here based on $1 billion of debt, what that impact would be. About $13 million if you fell 1 level, $26 million at 2 levels, and about $45 million at 3 levels. The thing I'll say about the bond rating is that, in addition to what I mentioned earlier, is they've obviously become much more stringent in the criteria, the rating agencies, in terms of how they evaluate organizations. And what we have built is a credit profile that fits this organization well. Cheryl mentioned that when you look at their criteria for large cities, what they really expect, if you look at their criteria, is a 35% balance in the general fund. Ours is at 15 to 16%. When you look at all of the elements that we've put together, that's where we get to the AAA. We've built a credit profile that's unique to us, that fits for us and works well for us as an organization. The other part I'll say is that when you look at financial management practices outside of the bond rating, these are things I would be recommending to you anyway. I mean, these are the kinds of policies and practices that put us in a best position as an organization to adapt to economic conditions when they change. We know that we can give you forecasts, and the one thing we know about forecasts is we're not going to hit that forecast. When we're looking out 5 years, it's difficult to project when you're going to have a recession, when you're going to have a slowdown, when you're going to have a significant growth period. And what we try to do with the financial policies and practices is position the organization to be able to adapt to that change. This next slide just shows you our other bond ratings. In addition to the AAA for the property tax supported debt, you see the other ratings listed there for the other enterprise funds and the convention center. I won't go through those in detail. And then moving back into property tax supported debt and moving towards the 2017 bond program. We went back in and looked at the debt plan as we do every year. Sometimes we look at it multiple times a year, looking at our assumptions, looking at what we think the next 4 or 5 years looks like. And in that case, we're actually running a model that goes out about 20 or 30 years. And we're looking at things like the taxable assessed valuation growth. And what we're projecting for 17 is a 7.5%. And then you see it ratcheting down to 4.5% and then 3%. Excuse me. One of the other major considerations here is we make no assumption about the debt service tax rate changing. You see the 21 cents per $100 valuation listed there. Our assumption going forward is that we're not going to increase that rate or lower the rate, that we're going to manage to the 21 cents. We've been at this debt service tax rate since, I believe, fiscal year 2004. So we've been managing our capacity within this as an additional constraint. We also looked at interest rate projections, trying to look at where the financial markets are in terms of what we think the cost of borrowing will look like over time. We factored all of that in to the debt plan, as well as we have a fund balance that we're using to help us manage some of the ups and downs when taxable values increase or decreasing. That fund balance helps us manage that as well. Having done all of that and looking at different sensitivity, this is what we consider what I would call the base model. We also ran scenarios that looks at what if growth is slower than we think? How do we handle the debt load? So we ran some different sensitivities, and where we ended up with was a recommendation for the 2017 bond program at $850 million. You'll recall last year during the budget process, we briefed you at $750, so we've increased it another $100 million to a recommendation of $850 million. We also plan within our debt plan to have bond elections every 5 years, so that continuous investment in our infrastructure and in the community. So you see a 2022 bond election at $750 and a 2027 at $650. This next slide just gives you the historical perspective going back to 1994. You can see that in 94 through 2003, our bond programs were much smaller. Starting in 2007, at that time, largest in the city's history at $550 million, 2012, $596, and now we're talking about $250 million more than the last bond program for 2017 at $850 million. What you see stacked on top of them are certificates of obligation that we have issued, tax notes that we have issued for various projects, and then some of it is self-supporting debt. And I do want to highlight that because we're not actually using property tax supported debt to pay for that debt. It is secured with property taxes, but we're using some other revenue source to pay for it. And really what we're doing there is we're leveraging our AAA bond rating. We're getting the lowest cost of borrowing that we can, and then we use that other revenue stream to actually pay for the debt. And that's what that very top bar, for example, in 2007, $115.4 million, that was all self-supporting. No property tax revenue was used for that. For 2017, over that 5-year period, the bars that are stacked on top of the 850 are all in the capital budget. And there are projects like the public safety radio system is in there. Our service centers are in there. Some of that is self-supporting, coming from solid waste and stormwater, and some of that is coming out of property taxes. So that's what that is. And then you see the 750 and the 650 tailing off in 2022 and 2027. So as we update this in the future, as we do refinancing, as we look at how the plan performs, we'll work on building that capacity out in the future, as well as we can continue to look at certificate of obligation capacity on an annual basis, as we've done with you historically over the past several budget sessions. We get into the summer, we go through this full update, and then we make an assessment about what additional capacity we could do. The tailing off on the GO bond program, we're comfortable with, because again, it's very difficult to plan something that is somewhat complicated in the structure and push it out that far into the future. The updates on an annual basis, I think, will take care of that. So with that, that concludes my part of the presentation. And let me turn it over to Mike Frisbee, who's going to get into more about the planning process for the 2017 bond.
Good morning. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. Well, that's exciting. $850 million. I'm excited. Hopefully you're excited as well for the next bond program being recommended. I'm going to touch on 4 subjects in about 10 slides. So a couple $1 billion worth of infrastructure, the 17 bond, streets and sidewalks, school zone safety update citywide, and we're also going to talk about ADA relative to streets and city facilities, the American Disabilities Act. So as we start here, I still have the $750 million planning number here. This is the 850 is a new number, so with your direction, we'll work towards that, but that's good. We have, of course, a lot of coordination throughout the past year on looking at the universe of projects, looking at going through the process of SA Tomorrow, and looking at the categories of the bond. So right now we're looking at categories that would include, one category is streets, bridges, and sidewalks, that in the 2012 bond, that was a category on its own, and then drainage, and then parks, facilities and community initiatives as a category, and then the potential category of housing as well. Status on the 2012 bond, we're in good shape. You know, the 07 bond was completed within the 5-year period, substantially complete. We're getting better at this, so the 2012 bond is even better shape. A year out from the end of the 5-year program, we're over 90% complete or under construction, well in hand to be substantially complete by the end of the 5-year period on the $596 million bond program. And we will continue to improve. It's a continuous improvement effort, so we'll do better even in this next bond program. Here's the update on the calendar here. So we're going to continue to really look at these projects. We have about 500 projects that are in consideration for the bond. You know, with an $850 million number, we're still trying to probably get it down. There's a lot of big projects that want to be considered, so we're probably still looking at trying to get it to 150 projects, 170 projects, something like that. So we'll continue that process. We've had an interactive process with you all, and so that's been good as well. We would expect that the mayor is going to be asking you for your committee appointees to be turned in by the end of July so that the committees can be formed. Again, these are policy decisions by you all, but that would be, if we stay with the model that we used for the 2012 bond, we would end up with a citizens committee per area of the bond, streets, drainage, and so forth. And in the 2012 bond, there was 3 appointees per district, per committee. So you can expect to have that out there so that you can get those names in to the mayor in a timely manner so we can keep this process moving. We're going to continue to work on the projects and ultimately have some staff recommendations that we go over with city management and you all ahead of the public process that would start in October and finish up in early December. And then the citizen committees make their recommendations to the council. You all would consider that in the January timeframe, make the final approvals and to call for the vote. So that's the process. In the 2012 bond, just to show you how important that citizen process is and those committees are, the city council approved 97% of what those committees sent forward for the 2012 bond, 97%. So very important public process ahead of us. A couple of things relative to guiding principles for the 17 bond. SA Tomorrow really is the new lens that we're looking through to really develop the 17 bond. We've heard that a lot from you all over the past year about the importance of SA Tomorrow, the comp plan, the multimodal plan, the sustainability plans, how they need to feed and really enlighten the 17 bond. So we're doing that. You can see here investment in major corridors, complete streets, as we're doing a number of those in the 12 bond, but we're going to continue the complete streets, increasing connectivity as well, connectivity between the street network and linear creekway systems, looking at multi-modes of transportation, how do we make not only quality of life better throughout the city, but mobility, safety, and so forth. Environmental sustainability, whether it be facilities that we're designing and building, parks, streets, drainage facilities. Leveraging funds is always big. We all know there's limited funding, so the more we can leverage with other public agencies, school districts, private developers, and so forth, we can do much more out there. And we've got a history of leveraging significant dollars through these bond programs, along with federal and state dollars. Supporting Vision Zero, obviously critically important too. Public safety. Vision Zero is all about getting down to zero traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries. Long ways to go. A lot of safety improvements are needed throughout this great city. Project continuation. Examples of that would be like a ceiling channel. We've invested big dollars in ceiling channel. We're seeing the benefits of that when the big storms come. The water is staying within the channel. But there's a continued phase that needs to be part of the bond. The Broadway corridor is another great example of a continuation. There's design processes going on now. We did Broadway Hildebrandt in the '07 bond, so there's a continued emphasis there. Commerce Street downtown, a continuation project, so that's important. Operations and maintenance, we always need to be looking at that, whether it be facilities, parks, even streets and drainage. What is it going to take to maintain these facilities after they're built? That's an impact on the general fund often and our operating budgets. Rough proportionality. This concept has been in place for the last couple of bond programs, and it would be recommended again. And so the concept is, there are needs all over the city, and so we look at total investment of the city. So you have bond program, you have the infrastructure management program, you have parks maintenance as well. So if you look at total investment, that should be relatively equal throughout the city. Some areas of the city, there's a greater need for drainage projects. Other places, there's a greater need for streets, maybe parks, so forth. So it all would balance out. A couple of key areas that are triggers for SA Tomorrow that we're looking at with SA Tomorrow, with the multimodal plan and the comp plan especially. How does it trigger projects into the 17 bond? We'll be looking at current bus ridership on corridors, and how does that relate to improved accessibility of the corridor so that people can get to those bus stops. Health is a big factor in SA Tomorrow. So health and income in the surrounding communities where projects are being considered. Also the growth centers, the 13 growth centers that are identified in the growth plans. What are the infrastructure needs in those growth centers, and also to connect one growth center to another. And then connectivity again between systems. So connectivity between streets and the linear creekway system, trail systems, connectivity between parks and how people get around, facilities and so forth. So that's all very important. A couple of key things that I know we want to talk about. I know some of the feedback that Francisco got in the 101 discussions had to do with sidewalks, and we want to go big with sidewalks in the next bond program. Obviously, the needs are great there. So that's something that can be looked at. Sidewalks, a lot of sidewalks get reworked when we reconstruct a street. There may be existing sidewalks, maybe not, but when we reconstruct, there'll be new ones built. A lot of times that's more of a hike and bike, a wider sidewalk. But that doesn't necessarily address the gaps. So a consideration would be potentially throughout the city having a chunk of dollars, like in the 2012 bond in District 1, there was a category, District 1 sidewalks, $6 million, okay, just to take care of some of those sidewalk gaps. So that could be done more comprehensively throughout the city. There's also feedback on let's underground utilities. Everybody wants to underground utilities for the aesthetics. We recognize that. It would be great to do everywhere, but it is very expensive. It's anywhere from $800 to $1,000 a lineal foot, okay, to underground the utilities. That's $5 million a mile. Now, when we take on a major street reconstruction project, it's about $10 million a mile. So $5 million a mile we would add to that to underground the utilities. So that's a big factor. So what's important from my perspective is that we need to do that in certain areas. Take World Heritage, for example. You got view corridors. You got areas throughout the city where the aesthetics are critical, and we want to do it. So we should build that in to those projects. Other areas, maybe in a neighborhood setting where every street has overhead power, right? Every street. So if we're doing one street, we probably would not invest big money in undergrounding just one street. It may not make sense. So maybe not a policy that goes citywide, but more selective locations, selective projects. Just so you know, CPS owns about 80% of the power poles that are out there, and AT&T owns the other 20%. So those would be but there are typically about a half a dozen companies involved in undergrounding utilities, because you do have Time Warner and others that are on those poles as well. So in your binder, I think it's in the back sleeve, there's a ballot for you, because we want to hear your priorities for the bond program. So if you look in the back, just by the end of the day, if you could turn this into Francisco, that'd be great. Just rank 1 through 5 those categories from your perspective: budget, quality, scope, schedule, and technology. Okay? Okay, let's talk a little bit about our street network. This is a familiar slide. We had an update this spring on our infrastructure. Everything we do is data-driven throughout the city, and that's the way it is with streets and sidewalks as well. So we know the condition of every street in the city. And roughly, you could say about 60% of our streets are in relatively good condition. That would be A's and B's, just like in school. A's and B's are good, right? C's, D's, and F's, not good. So about 60% good, about 40% bad, so in poor condition. You say, that, well, that's not too bad, but that 40% is 1,700 miles, so that will get you from here to Boston on the bad streets. So we have a lot of work to do, and that's going to be a combination of the bond program, the annual IMP program for streets. But we do have, if it would take the number that you've seen before, the $1.4 billion to get all of our streets into good condition or excellent condition. So it's really a combination of, well, it's 74 million per year is what it would take on an annual basis to continue the uptick on the system to make it better and better over time, 74 million per year. And so how we would get that is the combination of the infrastructure management program and the bond programs as well. We are on track in FY16 to complete the IMP projects. There's about 1,200 projects. We're in good shape there. The forecast that we're looking at this point is 50 million for street maintenance, and then the 5 million for sidewalks. Combining those two areas of streets and sidewalks, if we look at the reconstruction needs, so we try to catch as many streets as possible at a point where we can do, crack sealing and mill and overlay treatments to preserve the pavement before it requires that reconstruction. Because once it goes to reconstruction, you're talking about a lot more dollars involved. But in the condition today, there are 444 centerline miles of streets that need the reconstruction step. So as we look at the bond program, that gets factored in as part of that program. And then sidewalks, as you all know, we have over 2,100 miles of sidewalk gaps out there. And every district that's configured a little bit differently. Some districts that's very much clumped together in maybe a big subdivision that was built in a decade that they didn't do sidewalks, right? But there's other districts like District 5 where you have gaps everywhere throughout the district. It's dispersed all throughout the district. So it varies throughout the city as to what that need is. Okay, so this chart on the left-hand side is the centerline miles per district. Just so you can gauge, we have your centerline miles in your district of streets, and then the yellow on the right is the number of miles that need reconstruction. And this was part of a presentation this spring at a B session. So it's not necessarily a congratulations, District 2, Councilman Warwick, but the 95 miles of needed reconstruction, but you do have a large amount of mileage as well. So all of this shows that throughout the entire city, there's a lot of need in every district. Some of the smaller districts, they have less mileage, but they still have a tremendous need for reconstruction. And then this chart shows the gaps in the sidewalks from District 3 all the way through, and this is basically, from about 15% of the network, the entire city network in District 3, down to 5% in 6. But again, sidewalk gaps all over the city in need of being filled. So we do prioritize those. As you fund, we prioritize them around schools, around bus stops, around public spaces, parks, and so forth to make sure we're taking care of those priority locations. Okay, school zone safety. This is a FY15 through FY19 5-year program, projected at 1 million, proposed at 1 million per year. So we're finishing up FY16 here. So the plan was 20% upgrades throughout the city each year to get to that 100% in 5 years. We're already at 40%, so we're about 6 months ahead of that. So we anticipate this will probably be a 4-year program instead of a 5-year program, which is great. But we're getting those improvements all throughout the city. So you're seeing those school zone flashers going in. You're seeing the new signage go up. That's more of a fluorescent yellow-green color, very much much brighter during the day and night, and the fresh markings on the street and so forth. So very much a part of our Vision Zero effort, and important that we plan to continue, and we will propose that again for FY17. Okay, let's talk about accessibility. 2 areas here as I wrap up my slides. First of all, streets. So we have a lot of needs throughout the city for ADA accessible ramps at corners. Citywide assessment was done in 2011, so the need is known. It's all GIS based, so we know where the need is. We're putting in over 500 new ramps per year, so we're really chipping away at it throughout the city. And again, that's very much focused on how can we help bus service, how can we making sure we've got the ramps around the public spaces, and also schools as well. And then on the facility side, multiple departments working. I know recently in May, the Neighborhood and Livability Subcommittee met and discussed this subject. And I want to differentiate. There's the minimum requirement set out by the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Texas Accessibility Standards, but that's a minimum. So you don't necessarily just want to stick with the minimum. We're making sure that the minimum's met, but we want to go beyond that and look at equal accessibility, universal design standards. And Councilman Trevino, I know you've been very much a part of this discussion. And that what we want to look at, working with Building Equipment Services and TCI, is taking a look at those very public buildings and that the city owns, and really focusing on from the right-of-way, whether somebody's using the bus system, whether they're driving, walking, in a wheelchair, whatever the case may be, going from curb through the front door. What's that experience, and is it the same for everybody? Equal access to the facilities. Again, that's above and beyond the law, but it's a very good thing to do. So we plan to go through that assessment, working with the different departments that are housed in those facilities, and take about the top 60 of those facilities and do that assessment. What is that experience from the curb through the door? And is it the same for whether you are able-bodied or you're in a wheelchair? What is it the same experience? Okay, that wraps up my presentation. I'll turn it over to Peter.
All righty, good morning. As you may know, I have 3 boys, and so when Cheryl asked me to talk about buses and trains, I thought that would be pretty easy to do today. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about here real quickly. We're going to talk to you about the Advanced Transportation District and VIA, and then shift and talk to you about the Lone Star Rail District. And so this presentation on ATD, it is linked to VIA. There is some council discussion about providing more dollars to VIA through our Advanced Transportation District funding. The Advanced Transportation District was approved by voters in 2004. It's 1/4 cent of dedicated sales tax that collects about $64 million annually. You can see on the circle graph, VIA receives half of that, so about 1/8 cent, or $32 million this year. The city gets a 1/16 of a percent or cent for $16 million. And then that last 1/16 of a percent goes to TxDOT and Bear County for road projects. And so at issue is VIA's sales tax levy, or their amount of revenue that they collect. It's much less than their counterparts throughout the state of Texas by voter choice back in the 70s. And so Austin, as you can see, has a full cent, Dallas a full cent, and Houston as well. When you combine VIA's dedicated sales tax plus the amount of money they receive from the ATD, they're at 5/8 of a cent. And Jeff Arndt, the CEO for VIA, is suggesting that they need as much as a full half cent more to be comparable with these other cities in Texas. So about another $140 million annually is what they would need. As we know, Councilman Saldana has placed a lot of emphasis on this. Recently, Mayor Taylor convened an ad hoc committee to study the issue. It's co-chaired by Councilman Saldana and Councilman Lopez. There's 6 private individuals on there, including Alex Persino, Vic Boyer, Patty Radel, James Lifshutz, Darrell Bird, and Sid Martinez. We have had 5 meetings to date where we studied several of the issues, including VIA's funding and their model of how they provide service. We showed the committee our ATD funding and how we use it. We also studied other funding opportunities of how VIA, not using our ATD, but using other resources, could leverage additional dollars to include legislative action or state and federal grants. At issue for people in the city, like Mike Frisbee and myself, is our ATD funds today are used to support some basic infrastructure in the city of San Antonio. And so the $16 million that we use, or that we collect, is used really for 4 primary things: sidewalks, our traffic signal management system, intersection improvements, and then pedestrian safety improvements. The chart shows you some of the detail. There's a total, though, of 24 positions that support either directly or indirectly these services and projects, as you can see here. So at issue, when we've gone through the committee meetings, is transferring any dollars would mean either we have to reduce these services or reduce services in other places in the general fund so that we can maintain these with the general fund dollars. The current status of the ATD is that the ad hoc committee on their June 1st meeting did request 1 additional meeting to try to reach consensus on some of the options that they have been looking at. The committee will meet one more time in June, potentially June 16th, and at the mayor's direction, the committee will forward their findings to the Transportation Technology and Utilities Council Committee so the committee can further elaborate or discuss their findings. One of the options that has been studied and has been covered in the paper is, of the $16 million that we collect annually, possibly transferring $10 million of that to VIA over a phased amount of time, or over several years, I should say. The staff recommendation is that the city staff does not recommend allocating any of our ATD money to VIA. We have presented to the committee, and we recommend today that VIA, with the city, look at other funding mechanisms, potentially through state legislative action, to include looking at an additional vehicle registration tax, and that would direct some dedicated dollars to VIA. And we also did say in our committee meetings that if the council does approve transferring some of the ATD dollars, that it be done over a multiple-year phased-in approach. We're going to transition now to trains, to our Lone Star Rail District. And as we know, just a quick recap, the Lone Star Rail District has been around for some time. Their mission is to provide rail service from San Antonio and Austin, or in between those 2 major cities. It's kind of viewed as 2 commuter rail systems, with San Marcos being the center point of the 2. And so San Marcos to San Antonio and San Marcos north to Austin is the vision for this train system. Now we know from recent headlines in the paper that the UP, Union Pacific's agreement that they have had over the several years with the Lone Star Rail District was terminated. Nonetheless, the Lone Star Rail District, that is governed by a 20-plus member board, including 2 of our council members, has recently voted to continue the work that the Lone Star Rail District is doing. They are about halfway through an environmental impact study that is looking at 6 routes to include the one that UP has. And they're about midway through. You can see in the green box that the study will not be done until late 2018. What they discussed at the board meeting is that if they canceled or stopped the environmental impact study now, they would have to pay back the federal government the money that they have used to this date, and I think it's somewhere between $4 and $6 million. And so the board unanimously recommended to keep going on the environmental impact study and looking at these alternate routes that they have been looking at. Now, just relating this to the budget process, last year at this time, Lone Star Rail District presented the city with a request for a 36-year funding agreement that we studied and we presented to the City Council in a B session. You can see in the graph that it would escalate payments from the city over time. So year one would have been $500,000 from the general fund or from general fund tax revenue through a tax increment zone. It would increase to $3.6 million by year 5. It would get to $9.3 million by year 15, so it's gradually increasing year over year, and by the 36th year, it would be just under $16 million. The district requested funding from Bear County, VIA, and Alamo colleges as well. In the end, I think due to some time constraints from the Lone Star Rail District, the ultimate request was just dollars for planning, not a 36-year funding agreement. The council did approve $500,000 for planning. However, it was contingent on it was contingent on Bear County and VIA also contributing $500,000. Subsequently, Bear County withheld their $500,000, so our agreement with Lone Star Rail District was technically voided at that point. We did use, though, $50,000 of the $500,000 for the annual membership dues, and we have available today in reserve that $450,000. The current status for the budget is recently Lone Star Rail District staff presented a request to our staff, the team that's led by me, they requested $500,000 again in 2017. The $500,000 would be used, though, in this case, to leverage $6 million from our MPO. There's a $20 million dedicated reserve for the Lone Star Rail there, but we do need a 20% match. And so they asked for the city to contribute $500,000, as well as dollars from VIA and Bear County as well, $500,000 or greater. This issue was discussed this past Tuesday at our MPO. The budget impact then of this request is that, first of all, we have in the base budget $50,000 for their annual membership dues we've been paying for some time, but we would have to consider an additional $50,000 beyond the $450,000 that we have currently reserved to get to that $500,000 level. Because of this leveraged match, because the area could see, Lone Star Rail could see as much as $6 million from that MPO, staff is recommending that we set aside an additional $50,000 so that it can be added to that $450,000 for a total of $500,000 that could be pledged for the local match, leveraging that $6 million. That concludes my presentation.
All right, on this next section, I'm going to go through streetlights. I'm going to do it real quick, try to make up some time here, and because you've seen some of this before, so I'm going to go through it pretty quick. Just on streetlights, current spend, again, our budget's $14.8 million. We have about 72,500 streetlights all over the city, and you can see the breakdown there in terms of the categories. In terms of how we have analyzed implementing new technology for streetlights, what we have looked at is working within our existing spend. So when LED technology really became more prevalent in 2012 in terms of streetlights, we looked at, could we implement LEDs, they use less energy, take the savings from that less energy cost, and use that to pay for the lights, and basically it wouldn't cost us any more. And we were able to do that in several cases, and we've got a couple of recommendations for you going forward. The big thing with LED is they use less energy, they have less maintenance and operations costs, and they tend to last longer than your high-pressure sodium lights. A couple of pictures you've seen before. This is South Alamo, just here on the edge of the convention center. On the left side, you have the LED light, more the white light. High-pressure sodium would be more of the orange light. This is Theo Malone, one of our major thoroughfares. Again, LED and high-pressure sodium. Projects that were approved in 2012. We were able to work within the existing spend and get all of the lights on our major thoroughfares, streets like Theo Malone, Commerce, Blanco, actually done within our existing spend. That project was done in October 2014. We also got approval from the council in 2012 to do the downtown lights, about 1,500, and we're partway through that project and expect to be done in October of 2016. We viewed the projects as a win-win because essentially we're reducing our energy footprint. The energy savings here is about 5.1 megawatts. That's enough energy for about almost 1,600 homes per year. And then, of course, we're not adding any budget dollars in order to accomplish the project. Very quickly on the downtown, just to get an idea of the downtown footprint, when we say downtown, it is bounded by Cesar Chavez on the south, IH-10, IH-35, and I-37. We're talking about 1,500 streetlights. We are replacing some of the poles in the downtown area just because of their condition. 477 retrofits have been done today, meaning we've converted from high-pressure sodium to LED already. Most of that in the outer areas within this defined downtown area. Within District 5, there are additional funds that have been assigned in the last 2 budget cycles to add lighting, not to convert, but to actually add additional street lighting. We work with CPS Energy and with Councilwoman Gonzalez's office in terms of trying to identify how we would deploy that within District 5. CPS came up with a number of different options that allowed us to make that determination, whether it was going underground or adding lights to existing poles, distribution poles that were already there. So we had kind of a menu of pricing that we worked with Councilwoman Gonzalez's office to define how to phase that in D5, and to date, about 322 lights have been done. 64 of those are a conversion from high-pressure sodium to LED. 258 new lights are already up. We expect this to be complete in October of this year. The additional projects we talked about were that our residential streetlights that are mostly 100-watt, that we can now, based on where the technology is and the pricing is, we can now do those within our existing spend, meaning we can convert those from high-pressure sodium. We're not adding lights here, we're just converting what's there from high-pressure sodium to LED. The energy savings, about 2.6 megawatts, or enough power for about 806 homes per year. If we move forward with this, we believe we can get this done by the spring of 2018. And then the last one that's pending here is that I believe it was in the last budget cycle, we added $30,000 per district for additional lighting as well, and we'll coordinate with you all in terms of how you want to deploy that additional lighting within your districts. In terms of technology, we continue to look at this space in terms of how it evolves, everything from real-time outage monitoring to dimming capabilities to how you monitor consumption. So we'll continue to evaluate that. Based on our analysis today, these options wouldn't fit within our existing spend. It would be quite a bit outside of our existing spend to do this with CPS. And then lastly, I'll mention, as many of you have probably heard, there is a kind of an informal, unsolicited proposal that was given to us and to CPS. We continue to vet that. We continue to talk to that company. One of the challenges is we haven't really been able to get the information that we need to do our analysis because they consider that proprietary. So that is one of the challenges. We have been looking at it, and based on what we see in costs and what we were able to define from their proposal, I would tell you today that I believe they are substantially outside of our spend today, meaning that if you took our budget today and they tried to implement what they were talking about doing in the proposal, as I understand it, they are well outside of our current budget. So we'll continue to talk with them to see if there are opportunities there for us going forward. But as of today, based on the information we have, I don't believe it's close. So with that, that concludes my presentation, and I think that's the end of this section.
Great. So there was a lot of information in that last segment, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for you to engage in discussion. So as we move into our conversation now, we're gonna do Q&A and discussion together. So let's dance. Whoever's got an opening thought that they'd like to share, Shirley.
Francisco, so many questions, but I'll try to keep it high level. So Mike, can you talk a little bit about, the sidewalks?
I apologize, as a process reminder, our 3-minute rule is in effect, so go for it.
Okay, so I can only stay on the topic, or maybe I make my 3-minute and then I have to come back?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, sorry, I'll be fast. Mike, we have here, we talk about sidewalk gaps in particular, and I know we're talking about a big sidewalk project for the bond, but where do broken sidewalks fit in, or not functional sidewalks due to poles?
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Due to utility
Oh, due
poles
to
that are
poles,
in the
okay.
in the sidewalk that make them not functional.
Right.
Because you've estimated here how much the need is, but that does not include broken sidewalks, is my understanding.
That's correct. In fact, I failed to mention that the number that we've used before, there was 1.1 billion for sidewalk needs, and about 100 million of that was for the repair of sidewalks. So yeah, there is a lot of need for repairs. So so by ordinance, it's a requirement of the property owner to maintain their sidewalk, right? but we know that's often difficult to do. So what we proposed in the last budget process, and we have implemented this spring, is an initial cost-sharing proposal to issue out, and if it's on our website and so forth, that and we've had some takers now that are interested in that program. So we would do 50-50 match, and we designated initially, let's do 250,000, and let's see what the interest level is, and then we could build on that to come. So that's one avenue. But obviously, when we do sidewalk improvements in the bond, we can go into areas that have dilapidated sidewalks, and we can reconstruct those because we'll have a 30-year life on those new sidewalks, and so we can do that as part of the bond program as well.
Okay, so I would like to see some sort of, line item for that as well, because it's such an issue there and in our older communities. Another question I had is even regarding, so for example, you've given a cost for the sidewalks, and we had this issue where we were given a quote for a sidewalk. But in actuality, it wasn't $250,000, it was $9 million. So
Right.
how is that factored in when we're, you're saying we have this much need, we're going to allocate this much for sidewalks? Well, that wasn't a very realistic picture of what the maintenance was for. So how does that factor in when we're trying to budget for big projects or bond projects?
Sure. So, of course, every area is a little different as to what do you need to do to get sidewalks there. So the example you were discussing, the initial thought was this is a subdivision that was developed rurally, and so basically the street has no curbs or sidewalks, and so the runoff from the street when it rains goes into the yards, and that's the way it was designed. So there was interest from the community, let's get sidewalks. And so our initial look at that was, okay, if we put in curbs and so forth, now we're collecting the water, we need a storm drain system, we're really starting to get into expense. So let's simply look at ribbon or strip sidewalks, some type of maybe a barrier or maybe striping to separate the sidewalk from the pavement.
But
What can
I'm
we
going to
do?
interrupt you, Mike, here, because I don't want to take up too much time. So, but my question is not how can that particular example. What I'm saying
Right.
is, when we're talking about a budget, are we taking, and you're saying, we're going to allocate this much for sidewalks, is that really a realistic picture of what the need is? So it's sort of the disconnect of, what's being presented, what is actually there. And so how do we have a realistic balance? Because in this scenario, that sidewalk wasn't going to help that community. They needed a whole infrastructure, and then we're going to say, oh, well, we're only going to dedicate $9 million or however many $1 million that we have to sidewalks, but that's not an accurate picture.
So
That's a separate, there's sidewalk, then there's drainage, then there's, additional street maintenance. And so we've only allocated, I don't know, 50 million to sidewalks or something like that.
Right. So that's part of the prioritization process that we do with you all as we look at the allocation that's provided by City Council, and then where do we want to apply that in the community around schools and so forth. If there's a project that's significantly more expensive, we may have to shift and say, let's do this one first. That's
It's
less
still not
expensive.
exactly my concern. It's not even a prioritization. It's that it's not an accurate picture of what the need is. And then we're not actually given that information when we're saying how much work is budgeted and how much we should then take on as debt. So, I don't want to get specific about my particular example. It's just a question that I've had overall, that we're really not given a complete picture of the deferred maintenance or the need or the fact that we have really old communities that at one time, for example, in this scenario, we were saying, well, that used to be farmland. It was never really supposed to be a neighborhood. Well, now it's a neighborhood. And when we're factoring in all the need there, we're just saying sidewalk is going to be this much, street is going to be X amount, and that's not it. So
I'd just add, I think what Mike is trying to say is one size doesn't fit all. So in some areas, the 250,000 alternative might work. In this case, when it was presented to the neighborhood, they said, no, we want the full 9 million alternative. And then it becomes a choice for you to work with the community, with us, to decide what is it that we want to do and how much resource do we want to devote to that. But in other areas, it may work to do the less expensive alternative. So
Right.
what Mike is trying to estimate is the need based on an average cost or an estimate as to, not plan for the worst-case scenario or the most expensive case scenario. So to say that we would plan on curbs, gutters, drainage on a local street, we probably wouldn't recommend spending $9 million on 2 blocks, since in that case, I'm familiar, you and I talked about it, it's 2 blocks of a local street. But you might choose to do that on a facility that's more highly used, more residents live on and what they'd use. So then it becomes a conversation with you, with the community, and with the staff to decide what's the best case alternative. The needs will always outpace the dollars available, but working together, then we can decide where are the priorities. And we've heard from you that you'd like to see us recommend in the bond program a substantial sidewalk program, something approaching perhaps even 100 million, and we're looking for direction from you today as to, do we want to have that be a major component of the upcoming bond program? And if so, we'll start making plans for that and working with you as to then where do we target those dollars within your districts.
Chris, and then Mike.
no.
Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Francisco. Here we go. And I just wanted to thank Councilwoman Gonzalez for her points on that. They're very important. Mike, I had a question on the sidewalk issue, and then I'm also looking back in the Speak Up SA data and just pointing out, and that my guiding light on this is that the residents have said that streets and public safety are their top priorities. So I think that should give us the direction that we need, and again, emphasize how important your department, the work that you do, and how important it is for us to get it right in terms of making the right decisions on the priorities that we need in our community. So with the sidewalks, does that include sidewalks that are not ADA compliant? I know that this has come up in years past as well. Does that figure have those sidewalks as well? Because I know we have existing sidewalks, however, they're not up to code. And we can't have, I don't think that would qualify that sidewalk being compliant if it's not ADA compliant. And if we do we need to include that in the inventory of more sidewalks that we need? And if we do, how much more is that going to be?
Good questions, Councilman. So the way we handle ADA compliance with streets and sidewalks, anytime we're doing even an overlay of asphalt treatment, if there's a corner that doesn't have a curb ramp, or there's a curb ramp that's not compliant, that gets taken care of with the street project. Same thing with anytime we're doing a sidewalk project of any kind, we're taking care of those. And then completely separate from that, in our street maintenance program, part of the IMP, we are taking care of roughly those 500 ramps per year throughout the city. So it's kind of a three-pronged approach, whether it's just we know there's a non-compliant ramp or no ramp at these locations, we're going to go just take care of those, or it's with a sidewalk project, or it's with a street project.
Okay, thank you. And I know that we've also talked about it in numerous discussions about prioritizing those sidewalks in and around our schools, in and around our activity centers. I know we had a good discussion yesterday in comp plan about that as well. Cheryl, if you could kind of elaborate a little bit more. You were mentioning about us maybe taking a different approach, or looking at an even bigger investment in sidewalks. Where would the money come from? Would we add it to the bond? I know that the number increased to 100 million, if I'm not mistaken, from what we originally had looked at and discussed. So would we just add more to the bond total, or is it the 100 million already kind of factoring that in, that maybe we are going to be looking at an ask or a proposal that would make sidewalks more of a priority in this bond program?
So the dedication of funding for sidewalks would come from the $850 million. And what we're looking for today is policy direction from you all, if you'd like to see that in our recommendations. I know the mayor, several of you have said, let's include a larger dedication of the program to sidewalk construction. It's something that we hear from the community. It's consistent with what's coming out of our SA Tomorrow recommendations on making our community more pedestrian friendly. So 80% of our bond programs in 07 and 12 were devoted to basic infrastructure, streets, sidewalks, and drainage. Sidewalks, as Mike said, have been constructed as part of our street projects. If we want to devote a segment of the program specifically to sidewalks, where we may be doing sidewalk construction in each of the districts unrelated to street reconstruction, that's the kind of direction we're looking for today, and it would come out of the 850 million. It'd be in that category of streets and sidewalks, but we could dedicate a segment of those dollars specifically to sidewalks if that's the desire of the council.
Thank you, Cheryl. Certainly from my perspective, I think it's something that I would like to see, based on all the requests that I get from my constituents and the need for more pedestrian mobility, pedestrian safety. It's very much warranted and much needed out in the community. So I'm glad to hear that we're going to hopefully have more discussion. I'd like to hear from my colleagues as well about it.
Mike?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Chris, for bringing this up, because I think without question, all the feedback we're getting is infrastructure is where it's at, and we do need to dedicate as much as we can to it. I am concerned, however, though, streets and drainage, biggest problem there. I mean, after these last rains, we've heard from all of our constituents, so we've got to be careful that we don't start taking all the money from one area and taking it out of another, and we've got to watch that as we go forward. I'd like to take just a little bit bigger look as far as the procedures for the 2017 bond goes. In one of them, and I'm not sure who might be able to answer this question, I think some of us have been hit up with some major bond projects, and I'm just wondering, is it possible, as we lay these out before the voters, that we might separate out those major bond projects from the ordinary things like streets, sidewalks, and drainage that we are all, I think, in strong support of? And who takes care of that procedure? Is that part of the committee work, or is that we at council decide on that issue?
It's a combination. So let's take Stubing Ranch that was talked about yesterday. That would fall, it's a major project, but it would fall under the parks category. Now, Hardy Oak, which is also the construction of that as part of that plan, Hardy Oak would be a part of the streets discussion. So it really depends on the project. There have been a number of major projects talked about, and we could list those out, but they do fall into one of the categories that are discussed by the residents.
Well, Cheryl, I bring this up because what I'm very concerned about, and I think all of us have seen this happen in the past, there can be one unpopular project, and I won't say any specifically what it might be, that could actually drown out the others that are with it. And because that unpopular one, the voters come in and vote no on it, and all of a sudden we've lost some very valuable programs that we needed. And so I think that's really why I want to make sure that we have a set procedure for that. And then the other one, and this one I don't think any of us can really answer right now, but we do need to be thinking about, and that is the timing of the 2017 bond. We're all talking about the May election. Should we be talking about the May election, or should we be talking about maybe the November election of 2017? Cheryl, what would be the implications of maybe delaying this bond vote?
That's a political conversation for you all. There is no negative financial impact to the city. I mean, it's strictly a timing issue, and when you all believe we'd have the best chance of approval for the bond program. They have been in May, in 07 and 12, but they could be on one of the dates that you all decide you want to have the bond program.
Yeah, and I'm not asking for a specific date at this time, but I just think that that's one of the tools that we should be using when we listen to the feedback from our constituents on when would be the most appropriate time to challenge them with spending this kind of money. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we've got Roberto, then Ray, then Ron.
Thank you. Mike. So, I want to get back to this, getting into the weeds with sidewalks. So we have 2,177 miles of a sidewalk gap is what we talked about. And if I convert that into square feet, it's about 35 million square feet of sidewalk. Then we convert that into our cost, which we had said is about $980 million. That is about $28 a square foot that we're paying for sidewalks. I think I want to answer Councilwoman Gonzalez's question, which is why are things costing $9 million when all we want is a sidewalk? And so I'm simply saying, we talked about the sidewalk cost being closer to $5.50 a square foot. Is that correct?
So the sidewalks were, now our latest bid was just over $4 a square
Okay,
foot.
well, even better.
So, yeah, so we're getting great bids, great competition amongst contractors on it.
So I just used $5.50. So at $28, we're at $980 million to solve our sidewalk issue in San Antonio. But at $5.50 and not $4, we're under $200 million. Now, I mean, that's the big, yes. But let me just finish. I know, and because we're kind of going back and forth on this, I just point out that calculates to about $88,000 per mile versus $450,000 per mile. The point I'm trying to make is, as Councilwoman Gonzalez brought up, there's certainly going to be some areas, as our city manager also pointed out, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. And certainly that is evident here. That's evident in construction. And sometimes I think we think sidewalks are pretty easy. You just, you pour it and it's done. But it's not. It's complex. And we have very different conditions throughout our city, which is why I've been pushing for more options, different ways to build our sidewalks. But I also think that there are some areas where we do need to take a closer look at why we're sort of forcing the issue that might be limiting us on the ability to do most of these sidewalks at a very reasonable price so that it's doable. I mean, here we have a situation where $100 million, and I absolutely agree with that, and thank you, Mayor, thank you, Cheryl, for pushing that. We do need to do $100 million, but at these numbers, $100 million gets us more than halfway there. So, Mike, please.
So the one thing that we do need to consider is that $4 a square foot is for the sidewalk. But in most cases, you can't just do the sidewalk because you have a curb, you have an asphalt connection to the curb, you got to rework the sprinkler system or the landscaping that's next to it. You have driveways along the way. So that's where the cost, your numbers are right for just the sidewalk.
But most people don't have sprinkler systems, and I mean, they don't necessarily have to butt up against the curb. I'm going to disagree with that. I think that's this idea that we're having to deal with sprinkler systems throughout the entire city is, I mean, most people don't have, I don't have one.
In some cases, there's little retaining walls. I mean, there's a lot to the sidewalk.
No, I know, and I appreciate it. I've been working with your department. I think that's my point, is that I think council needs to know what some of these issues are with regards to why it's costing that much. Building some retaining walls, do some areas absolutely need to have these sidewalks, and do options help us get there? Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, definitely, we want to build these with quality that last 30 years, along with our streets and so forth, and we want to do it as least expensive as possible. So that's the approach. We appreciate continuing to work with you on getting there.
Rick?
Thanks, Mike. Put up I think it's slide 5, rules, so I can talk to it real quick. During the subcommittee, I don't know if you were about to this or not, but obviously we didn't come to a conclusion or a recommendation. We plan to follow it during the next meeting. One of the things that I suggested for the purposes for Cheryl to include some sort of an earmarked amount. Some sort of an earmarked amount from a budgetary perspective is to take the, well, that's not the slide. There's a different slide 5. And I'm not sure where it is, but I'll still talk to it. It's where you have a bunch of, a whole list, and maybe it was during Peter's discussion, a list of things that we do with our ATD dollars, and then the amount that's there. Maybe it's a different slide 5. My point is there are some expenditures. Okay, yeah, there are. I mean, I'll put that one up. You can stay up there because it really relates to you more than anything else. There are some dollars that are included in there that do go towards. There are some dollars in there that go towards specifically supporting VIA's initiatives, right? So we are already spending, out of the $16 million at the bottom, there's probably a number within those categories that we're already directing towards VIA. And that's coming out of our ATD dollars, which is a recurring amount. I think the discussion that we were having was if we could identify what that was and slide that money or that capital expenditure over into a bond, then we would be able to take those dollars and perhaps earmark those to go over to VIA. What VIA is going to do with those is not necessarily build sidewalks, which is complementary to their ridership, but they're going to increase the frequency of the bus routes. So that was one suggestion. Earmark some number that says that could conceivably get us there if we were to pull some number out of the $16 million and slide it over to bond. Now we took $80 and do it that way. They are looking to do something different with their with the dollars that want to increase frequency, and that I think that's going to be really important. So I would suggest that may be a direction that we do from a bond perspective or from a budgetary perspective of how we go about doing that. The other one is you talked about the MPO match on the Lone Star Rail, whoever had that. I just want to make sure that everybody is clear on that. We currently have $450,000 committed on an annual basis, pulling out $50,000 for our membership, like the Lone Star Rail. I think some dialogue around, a lot of dialogue is happening around whether we leave our 450 in there or not. I would suggest to all my colleagues that my recommendation is that we seriously consider leaving it there for the short term at least, if not permanently, simply because I think it's the city's commitment to 450,000 is relatively small in comparison to other players that are committing to this. MPO has made a $20 million commitment, to the construction of Lone Star Rail. That one perhaps is in jeopardy. I don't know if we're going to pull it off or not. What I've asked Lone Star Rail to do is to tell us what is it indeed that you would do with the money, when would we see results, and what is the potential outcome. There's options that perhaps are not reasonable options. There are options that they might consider routes for, but they're not going to be reasonable. We have not made at MPO a determination whether we're going to leave that money there or not. What we've determined is we're not going to pull it until we get the data that's required to make that decision. I would suggest that we do the same thing at the city level. Leave the money there until that determination is made. I suspect that in the course of the next few weeks that'll happen. From another perspective, as I mentioned to the mayor this morning, we have a partnership with the city of Austin. They've committed their TERS. They're already collecting dollars. We've made this commitment. The Austin MPO and the San Antonio MPO have committed dollars. We really have to keep this partnership together as long as we possibly can until we find out that indeed this is not a doable deal. I'll end in closing my comments that says, this was a great idea 15 years ago. It remains a great idea. The numbers that made it a great idea have only proven themselves. And I think as a city, we need to kind of continue that commitment. And I spoke as fast as I possibly could to get it in. I still didn't make it.
Really?
But thank you very much, Mayor.
But you came down close, Ray, and well said, well said.
I'm tired of speaking.
Ron and then Rebecca.
Thank you. First, I just want to congratulate the city management and particularly Mike on 90% completion already for the 2012 bond. I know there was a lot of changes in the process, and it's worked pretty well. We have a marquee project, roadway project in my area, and it's gone very well. So congratulations for the management and all that. I still maintain that the debt management, now that the comptroller is on the same page with us in telling the story, the debt management of the city is really one of the key success points for us. Questions on ATD, and Jeff, if you don't mind, we had a discussion outside. I don't know what the recommendation will be from the ad hoc committee, but the point being, I think there's general agreement that we need to find additional revenue for VIA to make them competitive. We also have major need with regard to transportation coming from SA tomorrow. What are the legislative options that we have to perhaps enhance our revenue there?
Sure. What I told the ATD committee last week was that, number one, the challenge for VIA is that we as a community are at the sales tax cap currently. And busting through the cap, so to speak, is almost a non-starter at the legislature. It's been talked about in years past, but Very, very unlikely. There was an effort a few years ago for a local menu that would have given communities 4 or 5 or 6 options to generate local funds. It was everything from a road use fee to a vehicle registration fee to a local gas tax, a number of things. It was defeated in the legislature, and the 2 sponsors in the House and Senate who pushed that bill were subsequently defeated in their elections. And so it's almost made local option a bad word in Austin, unfortunately. Now, that said, the last 2 sessions, the effort has been to close the funding gap for TxDOT at the state level, and the legislature has largely done that. So there is possibly an opening to restart the conversation about local funding options. And a number of the Texas Transportation Commissioners, TxDOT's board, were discussing that just a few weeks ago, saying they all felt that communities needed more local options. That's the big picture. In my view, personally, the most viable option could be a vehicle registration fee. Bexar County was successful in getting a $10 fee a few sessions ago, and last session, border counties were able to get a $20 vehicle registration fee. We're collecting 10. So that's every time you register your vehicle down in the county, you pay an extra $10 that goes to the RMA here. There's a possibility of pursuing that as a city initiative to go into a city fund for transportation. There's a couple of different ways to slice it, and we're seeking your input as part of the IGR committee and talking with our community partners about what the right effort is. But I want to set the expectations appropriately. It's a very hard lift, no question, because it's a anti-tax, anti-fee philosophy at the legislature.
Well, judging by the history of our transformative projects, Lone Star being one of them, this could be a long-term play. So I would ask that our IGR committee maybe take up, Chairman Cryer, take up the issue of what options are available to us, and maybe we can get behind. There was a mobility study done that suggests that a nickel gas tax local option would generate $200 million for this community over a 5-year period, which is substantial funding compared to potentially having to take from one area to another. Mike, I have a quick question. Thank you, Jeff. You mentioned that there is now an uptick based on our IMP spending on road condition. What is that? And, because average neighborhood in my district, or anywhere in the city, I would imagine, sees the conditions of their roadways basically we just want to stop the bleeding. But you're suggesting that at a $74 million per year pace, we're seeing an uptick in the condition overall?
Right. So the city manager, during the budget process last summer, she challenged us to, okay, what would it take to not allow our system as a whole to continue to degrade or even flatline? What would it take to have an uptick system-wide? And so that's that $74 million investment per year. And you all really stepped up with the recommendation of Cheryl last year to fund $64 million in streets. So that was, and then if we couple whatever's available in the infrastructure management program on an annual basis with the bond program, then we can exceed that $74 million per year, and then that creates the system-wide uptick where we know, yeah, we have a lot of streets that are still in bad condition, and we need to get to those, but the system as a whole is improving.
So what, are we in a state of degradation at the current level of IMP funding? And that $74 million is just for streets, or is that the whole?
That's just for street maintenance.
What are we at right now, or what were we prior to the $15 million?
So we had, historically, it was going, if you go back a couple of years, historically it was $35 million, okay? Last fiscal year, it was $41 million, and then this fiscal year, we're up to $64 million. So that's a great trend. Of course, revenues are different every year, so you have to look at what can be done. But coupling it with now a bigger bond program, that's where we'll be able to leverage that and get above that $74 million a year to make sure that the system as a whole is improving.
So our goal amount ought to be in a fiscal year budget cycle to get to that $74 million a year mark if we're going to continue the trend, not to stay at 61.
So even if it's a $50 million, okay, per year, if that's what the revenues would allow. But you couple that with, we're going to do maybe 400 million in streets in the bond, something big in that range, and that's street reconstruction, so it's not just pavement surface. But if you add that, you'll get there with the bond program.
Okay.
So the more, obviously, the more the better in the IMP, but you couple that with the bond to get there.
Right, okay, thanks, Mike. And then the last question I had, or maybe it's just a statement of support with regard to the sidewalks. Councilman Cryer began the initiative on the school zone safety. We're at year 2 now.
Right.
And we're almost at 40%.
Right.
Where will we be at the time of the passage of the bond in your mind?
So we projected that we were going to do 20% per year, but now a year and a half into it, we're at 40% already. So, if we pick up another at least 20% between now and, we'll be 50, 60%.
Well, with the backdrop of Vision Zero and just a recognition that we need to improve sidewalk gaps, but also repair, I would suggest that there's, and our policy states it, that there's not a more important priority for infrastructure spending than to get kids who have to walk to school there safely. So I would suggest that either a combination of the fiscal year budget or the bond as a priority should take care of that entire need. I mean, we shouldn't wait 3 more years or 2 more years to complete the school zone safety program. We should do that now as a top priority in the bond if necessary. So, thank you, Mayor.
Rebecca, then Joe, Ray, and Alan.
Thank you. I think for questions of clarification, for the bond right now, do we have any projected bond savings right now on any of our?
We do not expect savings in the 2012 bond,
Okay.
just given the economic environment.
Okay, and I think as we start planning for the bond and going to what Councilwoman Gonzalez said, one of the things that we heard with my particular district and some projects was costs have gone up in construction, costs went up here. That's not what we budgeted for in whenever we got the prices too. So what did you learn from that, I'm sure you have learned from that you're going to apply to this so we do not find ourselves in that situation again, because we're having to forego certain things that the voters approved.
Right.
And then we had to forego them. And now I'm having to find other monies in the budget in order to fix my overlook. So, we need to learn from those issues to make sure then we put them into the cost projections in the future. And on that same note, coming to the sidewalks, I think part of the issue is, yes, we've identified areas or there have been things on the IMP or on the ATD list for improvements of our sidewalks, but then when we get out there, we notice the sidewalk, you can put a sidewalk out there, but it doesn't address the issue of poor drainage that will then make the sidewalk not work because it'll be covered in water. So you'll have a brand new beautiful sidewalk, but there's no drainage there. So instead of just going and doing the evaluation of, okay, I've done my evaluation and it's $87,000 for sidewalks with curbs, but come to find out you're going to have water overflowing and you're not going to be able to use it, we get the calls, and then we're going to have to go out there, tear down the sidewalks again, do a new street. So that is putting all of that, seeing it holistically of our streets. I think that for myself, when looking at our IMP list and our ATD lists, to getting the true numbers of what will alleviate or fix those true issues of those streets. So we have that quality and scope of our sidewalks and our streets. That's one of the things to take into consideration when looking at all of these dollars, because it's not just a sidewalk. We want to make sure we have a great quality street with sidewalks there. So that's another thing to move forward. Because sidewalks are a huge issue in the district, 334 sidewalk gaps, and talking to school zones, one of the issues too becomes areas that are safe for crossing pedestrians, especially seniors around senior centers, et cetera, to take that into consideration. And then finally, when it comes to the ATD, because of that, one of the questions I have are, for those 24 positions, it was talked about sliding that money over. If that money slid over, could you ever get that money back, and what happens to those city positions?
Yes, so there are certain things in ATD that could be done in a bond program, like sidewalks and so forth, but there's others, like staffing, traffic signal system operations, that could not be funded in a bond program. So then we look at that now, we look at that as right-sized, but that could be cut, or the only other funding source for that potentially is general fund. So that's been a lot of the discussion at the ATD Ad Hoc Committee, is how do you strike a balance there?
Is that the whole traffic signals department?
That's everybody that's involved in traffic signal management. So at our TransGuide Center, co-located with TxDOT and VIA, managing the traffic signal system and so forth, they're the ones taking care of it.
Okay, that concerns me.
Yeah,
Joe?
so we'd either cut it, or we'd reprioritize among other general fund activities and decide that's more important than something else that would have to be reduced. That would be the council choice.
Jim?
Thank you. I'm going to try to hit two topics with two stones here, and in order to do that, I want to go back to Ben Gorzel's presentation, if he's still in the room. Ben, the more I learn about social media, the more I learn that it is unbound by normal rules of either truth, accuracy, or morality. And to give you two examples of that, social media suggests, and we will have the chief, I assume, this afternoon. Social media suggests that after Chicago, San Antonio has the highest murder rate in the country after Chicago, which I know is a bunch of baloney, but that's what's on social media. Secondly, social media has suggested for some time that San Antonio, and I'm going to your slide 5, has one of the highest per capita debt rates of any big city in the country, and I'd like you to remind me that that is not true. Comptroller Combs came out with a report a couple of years ago when I was here and you were here, and suggested that was the case, and my recollection was that it was because it included SAWS and CPS debt. So for the record, how do we rank on per capita debt, and I'm looking at your chart, compared to other big cities?
So for the record, this slide is coming straight from the State Comptroller's website, Tell the Truth Texas, and we rank 8th out of 10. The 10 major Texas cities, or Texas cities, were ranked 8th lowest. And you do recall correctly, when the State Comptroller first came out with this concept, we had a lot of dialogue back and forth with them, because they did lump in CPS, SAWS, and were making these comparisons among cities. And again, those utilities are separate. They have their own revenue streams. They have their own boards that govern that. They're owned by the city. But you can't take that and compare that to Dallas or Houston, where they don't own the electric and gas utility. And that was our point, was that you have to do an apples to apples comparison. When you do that, we're ranked very favorably, and you can see that here. And then I, again, would validate it with, you've got 3 independent rating agencies that take a look at us every year in terms of how we manage our debt, how we manage our finances. We have the highest bond rating from the property tax side that you can get.
Most importantly, our property tax does not back CPS or SAWS debt.
Right.
So their revenues support their debt. So it was an apples and oranges comparison, but that's been corrected, and now we rank 8th among the top 10 largest cities in Texas.
And I think that's a very important point, because it is used regularly, and people still tell me that we have this enormous debt obligation. So anyhow, thank you for that, Ben. If I could go to Peter Zanoni and close out my inquiry here on the Advanced Transportation District. 2 comments. Number one, I absolutely agree with Councilman Lopez. We have got to stay the course on this rail project until we either figure out that we're going to get it built, or we figure out that we're not going to get it built. But in the meantime, we've got to hold our placeholder on it. Peter, I know you've been having these conversations about transferring ATD tax money to VIA, and I recognize that we made a historic mistake a long time ago in not authorizing VIA to have the full penny, but we didn't do that. And what I want to be sure of before the city surrenders a revenue stream that has been used to fund streets and drainage improvements in very specific ways for a long time, is that we have a legal opinion, which I would like to see in writing from our city attorney, that says we can take money that voters approved for purpose A and transfer it to purpose B without opening ourselves up to a lawsuit from some citizen like, oh, say, Jeff Judson, just to pick a name out of the hat, that we haven't heard in a long time, and discover that we have improperly transferred those funds. I'm with Councilman Saldana on finding creative ways. I am more than happy, Councilman Nuremberg, for us to go to the legislature we went to the legislature for 3 sessions on getting 5 TxDOT commissioners, the result of which was we lost the first 2. The third time, we got 5, which resulted in Hope Andrade becoming the chairman of TxDOT. My point being, just because the legislature has said no before, doesn't mean they're going to say no the next time and the next time and the next time. So are you satisfied that we can legally tinker with money which voters authorized for purpose A and transfer it to purpose B?
Yeah, it would be, Martha would answer that question, but we have had those conversations as she's walking up here. The opinion is that it can be done, but there are risks. It's not risk-free, I think is what Martha, is that? So we've had the conversations with the committee members. Depending on how you read the ballot that the voters used to vote in that year, it is doable to transfer the money, but there's some risks. Martha may want to elaborate.
Right, and those risks would come, we've had this conversation before, would come from a taxpayer challenging the change of the use of the funds. The ballot material, some of the background that took place back when we first had the election, it was a via election, and I believe that the materials just highlighted some of the use, and those were not necessarily written in stone, and I believe that we could change the purpose of the use of the funds, but it is with some risk because there are taxpayers who might challenge that. I believe there's some discretion with the council to use those funds.
Well, thank you for that, Martha. I was the treasurer of that campaign, and I remember giving a lot of speeches for it, and I remember telling people over and over again that we were going to use their money for these purposes, and people in the audience nodded and said, A-OK by me. Lastly, I suspect Francisco's standing up because my time has run. I think Councilman Lopez and I agree we've got to see some management changes with LSR as a part of our continued support. And secondly, Chairman Lopez, I think you and I and Councilwoman Villagrán need to sit down with Bruce Bugg. We have no replacement for Tullis Wells on that board, as a result of which I think we do not have the kind of voice within the leadership that we have had in the past. And that concerns me a lot, both in terms of the management of that business and in terms of the board oversight of that business. So with that, Francisco, I will be quiet.
Thank you, Joe. Ray?
Thank you, Francisco. And I'll speak directly to the Advanced Transportation District. I know that we've talked a lot about streets and drainage and sidewalks, and I think that's been robust. We have had a very robust conversation, and just so that we make sure what the purposes of today is not the day to make a final judgment on ATD, but I do appreciate the comments and the feedback that you all have given so far. I would allow time for the committee to come up with its recommendation, and that we also get an opportunity to hear from VIA about what the proposal would do for them in terms of impact. I think what we've heard today is that we would lose something, but I think the question is what we would gain in the event that we do transfer ATD dollars. So let me start here. We've had a wonderful conversation over at the folks with the ATD. The committee has been really thoughtful in their approach. What it's really boiled down to is that what we have in terms of opportunity here is for us to really breathe life into the culmination of a lot of the thought and input that's come from the community in the SA Tomorrow plan. So some of the SA Tomorrow plan does point out specific corridors, multimodal corridors that need investment. And there was some issue of not getting a consensus at the last committee meeting, and I was one in which I wasn't ready to yet say whether we should go forward because we had not yet gotten a deliberate and thoughtful, concrete explanation from VIA about what would happen, and we finally got that at the last ATD. So I would say I think you should look forward to a very impressive plan from VIA about what is possible with the ATD dollars. Here's what also was a charge from the mayor that was important for us to dig through, is what is the real problem with respect to VIA, and the real problem is operating dollars. They can receive money from the state and the federal government to provide for bus shelters or capital things that go into the ground. The question will be, where can they find operating dollars to really compete with a demand that this city will put on them, because they are our partner. Let me underline that. They're our partner. And what happens sometimes is we talk about transferring dollars that are doing one thing and going to another, and I think we start to look at them as competitors. That VIA maybe is our competitor for these dollars. They are not. We should look at them as our partners here, and we've got some great plans backed up by a lot of voice about what this city needs in terms of multimodal, and they are our multimodal partner. So kind of keep those things in the back of your head, because here's the other thing to consider. The question is what we're doing today with those dollars. We are not being very thoughtful with the expense of those dollars today. We have been spending those ATD dollars for the last 10 years. And let me just correct something from Councilman Cryer. They're not going in, I would challenge you to point to a street or drainage project that an ATD actually funded. That's not their purpose. In fact, I'm glad to know you're the treasurer at the ATD, because you had listed a list of streets and names that ATD should have specifically gone to according to the campaign material, did not go into any of those streets. So if there's a challenge, they should be challenging some of the campaign material we put out. We have not been as thoughtful as we need to be with $10 million, $16 million that we get every year. There has been no strategic vision. What we need is a plan that SA Tomorrow that is building out that vision. Let's fund it, and let's give it a chance for VIA to come to us and present what is possible with regard to impact with that ATD dollar. So I'll just end it there with ATD. I thought that was an important conversation for us to have here today.
Great. Mayor, do you have a new comment or a response? Okay. And then actually, Alan comes next, and then Shirley, and then Ray.
But in regards to streets and sidewalks, I guess this is my question. Have we examined, especially on the sidewalk side?
I think your mic needs to.
Have we examined, especially on the sidewalk side, the use of the sidewalks after they're completed, and if it's equal throughout all the districts?
The pedestrian use?
Yes.
We've done various pedestrian studies, but not on a comprehensive way. I know the MPO has also done a pedestrian study.
Yeah, I would hate to assume that sidewalks completed further out in more suburban areas are probably, again, it's just an assumption, are less utilized because of the socioeconomic issues and the lack of bus transportation and the lack of connectivity.
Because of the vast need throughout the city, we're only putting sidewalks in where we know there's pedestrian activity and the people want the sidewalks. That's the focus. So we know that they are getting used.
Per request or per necessity based on these studies?
We don't necessarily differentiate the pedestrian that has to use the sidewalk versus the one that wants to use the sidewalk. But it's through the sidewalk demands and needs are great throughout the city.
And then also, I just wanted to chime in as well as far as the funds to VIA, anything that's going to increase the frequency and extend the frequency, because as we know, our inner city neighborhoods are becoming more and more costly to live in, especially on the property value side. And folks aren't necessarily getting pushed out of those neighborhoods, but a shift because it's of the transient population of renters. Because 50, 60, 70% renters in a lot of these neighborhoods are getting pushed wherever the cheap rents are. So if we could focus maybe on where rents are lower and looking at that in regards to increasing the frequency on VIA transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Shirley, in the rear.
Back to just a question about the sidewalks, because we've been on and on about it. But part of my, I guess, concern is that if it's labeled in the bond specifically sidewalk projects, that it can't be used for anything else. And I wonder if the wording couldn't be a little bit different, that says that we're going to address a particular neighborhoods, can the language be slightly different so that we don't get stuck with a sidewalk project that's not functional? Or that many of the requests that I had for sidewalks then were not eligible for sidewalks because it required a complete street rehab, and then I wasn't able to do anything for the neighborhoods. So what is the possibility to change the language so it doesn't just say sidewalk project?
Well, there's lots of possibility. The language hasn't been decided yet, and it falls into that streets and sidewalks category. I mean, we can devote and say that we're going to spend 100 million on sidewalks, but we'll have some flexibility.
Sure.
Now, having said that, we want to work with you and the citizen committees to identify where those projects are. In the 07 and 12 programs, we've been successful because we specifically list the projects and then do those projects. So we have some flexibility based on need, and we'll further fine-tune and engineer those projects so that we have a good idea on whether or not it's a $9 million project or we can do it for $250,000, depending upon what the needs are and what the community desire is in conjunction with the council member. So we do have flexibility.
Good. Well, thank you. I think that helps with a little bit of the concerns I have about that particular issue. And I didn't have a chance to talk about the lighting that was presented. My question about also about the lighting. So we know that we are, trying to improve the lighting, add more lighting in specific areas. I know I've been requesting every opportunity I have to get more lighting in my neighborhood, additional lighting. Are we now? I need to make the, I want to continue on that program, specifically the additional lighting in the neighborhoods where where they have been requested. So I just want to speak very highly in favor of that. I'm not sure if this is where we need to say, yes, continue with this program, promote it very highly. I feel like I haven't had a chance to say, yes, I want this, or no, I don't. We're talking about priorities, but yes, I want to continue to invest in that program, particularly the one where we're doing infill lighting. And also just regarding the ADT that I didn't have a chance to weigh in on, just that I believe very strongly in all forms of alternative transit, and that we are just taking every opportunity to connect people to opportunities. I mean, that's really the point of the whole transportation record, is to connect people to opportunities. So I hope that we can continue the discussion and find ways to fund the ATD, to fund projects like the Lone Star Rail, which I want to continue to advocate for and support the Lone Star Rail, and hope that we can make those projects come online, and all types of additional alternative transportation, whether it's walking, whether it's cycling, whether it's mass transit. And I didn't have a chance to give my support for those projects. And I think I had one final statement on, I was trying to take notes so I could be brief, but if I need to come back in, I will. But that was, I just want to make sure that I'm advocating for them and don't leave without saying that I support or not support.
And we'll go to the mayor for our closing comment in this section before we go to lunch. And then, of course, remember that we've got a whole hour and a half to continue working these priorities later on in the day. So this isn't your last opportunity to weigh in on any of these. Mayor?
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think this has been a really good discussion on the topic that we probably hear most from our constituents about. And I just want to remind everyone we'll have the chance to speak more in depth on this as well after we get the budget proposal. One of the 5 work sessions that we'll have will be on this topic. So kind of quickly, my comments and questions are in relation to Lone Star Rail. I believe that we should follow the admonishment of Councilman Lopez as far as kind of holding those funds in place to demonstrate in good faith that we want to continue to be in partnership with those who are working on the project, as long as there is still a possibility for the project to come to fruition. I wanted to reiterate my support and advocacy for a large sidewalk component in the 2017 bond. I think that is very important, gives us a chance to really chip away at the need that's out there, though I would be interested in conversations on how we could achieve some cost savings in doing that, and would like to learn more about the cost-sharing program that we have in place. By way of question, I wanted to ask if the staff had any information on the outcomes of the previous Sidewalk to School program that we had, as well as and how that works in conjunction with the school zone safety. And then, Mike, while you're up there, I think Councilman Nierenberg asked this question, but so I hate to be redundant, but I just want to clarify what our projections are in spending on the IMP. We've made a lot of progress in increasing that, but I want to get clarification on how we could maintain where we are now or even continue to increase that, and any thoughts you have on how that works hand in hand with the bond program as far as the types of streets we do on IMP versus the bond. And then my comment on the ATD is I'm eagerly awaiting the committee's recommendation. And I appreciate the time and effort they've put into that. And I thought the discussion on us exploring options for local options for funding via and transportation is a very good start, in that we need to take action on that as far as our legislative agenda for the next legislature. Mike?
Sure, Mayor, I can address those first two items. So the city built a number of projects throughout the city with the Safe Routes to School program to put in sidewalks and so forth. That was funded, some of that was funded through the state. There was some federal opportunities as well. So we're constantly looking at those grants. The one that came through TxDOT, they haven't had the funding available the last couple of years, so there hasn't been a call for any projects, but we'll follow up with them to see.
So we never use bond money on that?
The bond dollars?
We never use bond dollars on that, Safe Routes to School or Sidewalk, the program where it was specifically focused on sidewalks on the routes to school.
The program that I'm thinking of was called Safe Routes to School, and it was a state-funded program that we built throughout the city. We targeted some specific routes to elementary schools and put the sidewalks in and the crossings in. Of course, in the bond program, we did a lot of safety improvements as well with sidewalks.
I guess what I'm suggesting is that based on whatever our outcomes were from that program, what we're able to accomplish, that we use that as a start, as a baseline, and looking at how we could target a large sidewalk program, that would be a good starting point. Because even though if it's $100 million or whatever, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's still not going to meet all the needs. So at least if we could build on some efforts that are already in place, I think that might make sense. And now you've brought up the fact that there could be additional opportunities for leveraging. As you said, this has been a program that the state has supported in the past, so maybe we might be able to apply for it in the future.
Right. The second question had to do with the level of street maintenance funding in the IMP. So this fiscal year you authorized $64 million, and of course based on the revenues that we had to work with. Right now, the baseline that we're looking at for FY17 is $50 million. And then, of course, that's a policy decision as we go, but it's factoring the revenues and all the needs as well. And so then we would be coupling that with the bond program, as we know there'll be a significant amount of street improvements with the bond program.
Could you just clarify again the type of streets that each program addresses?
Yes, in fact, that's a good point. There has been discussion right along about the bond program addressing some of those, what Councilman Saldana called the tweener streets, because there's some streets that are really, they're too expensive to put in an annual infrastructure management program. Maybe they're a couple $1 million, and it's difficult to do that when you have a lot of other street needs. And historically, maybe they've been a little small for a bond program. So we have had a lot of internal discussions about how do we address some of those collector type streets that need to be reworked, and so that those don't fall through the cracks.
The other, I'm sorry, just one more, I think. The other thing I'd ask us to be thinking about, which it's a little bit of a delicate question here, but I am going to throw it out, in relation to the IMP and the scoring on the streets, how we can develop a system that allows us to address the worst streets. I know right now we use the IMP funds proportionally, and you know, of course, that makes sense as far as everyone being able to address needs in their communities. But for those communities that have the worst streets, what's the strategy on them ever catching up is the question. So I'll just put that out, leave that out there for us to mull over.
Does that require a response?
Well, I think from my perspective, there's the F streets and the F minus streets that are out there that are really in bad shape. And they're expensive to reconstruct, but they need to be done at some point. And so what we've done before is some have been addressed in the infrastructure management program, limited because of the cost associated. And then we do want to target those in the bond program as well.
Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the first half of our budget council retreat. Lunch is going to be next door. We're going to come back from lunch at 1:15 sharp, meaning at 1:15 we will resume the program with public safety and our briefings from the chiefs. So please be back a few minutes before that so that we can get a prompt start. Thank you.